Hey there, fellow Tolkienites. Have you ever had an epiphany? One of those sudden realizations of something wonderful, maybe even miraculous? There's this strange moment in one of Tolkien's letters where he speaks of an event just like that, a moment when he suddenly realizes, as he says, the way things really do work. So, since Easter is today, I wanted to discuss this amazing anecdote from Tolkien and explain how it relates to the resurrection of Christ. But before we dive in, would you do me the great honor of subscribing to this channel? Thank you so much. All right, let's hear the passage in question, which comes from letter 89 of these letters right here. I was riding along on a bicycle one day, not so long ago, past the Radcliffe Infirmary, when I had one of those sudden clarities which sometimes come in dreams. I remember saying aloud with absolute conviction, but of course that's how things really do work. But I could not reproduce any argument that had led to this, though the sensation was the same as having been convinced by reason, if without reasoning. And I have since thought that one of the reasons why one can't recapture the wonderful argument or secret when one wakes up is simply because there was not one, but there was a direct appreciation by the mind, but without the chain of argument we know in our time serial life. So what was going on there? Well, this letter was written in November of 1944 in response to a letter from his son Christopher, who was serving as a pilot in the Royal Air Force at that time. Christopher had spoken of the care of his guardian angel, which leads to the substance of Tolkien's letter. Tolkien reflects on the role of guardian angels in our lives, which leads him into a further reflection on the nature of miracles. And so that leads us to Tolkien's epiphany. You see, Tolkien was trying to explain a unique sensation to Christopher, the feeling of eucatastrophe. Here's what he says about that feeling. Eucatastrophe is the sudden happy turn in a story which pierces you with a joy that brings tears. And I was there led to the view that it produces its particular effect because it is a sudden glimpse of truth, capital T truth. Your whole nature, chained in material cause and effect, the cause of death, feels a sudden relief as if a major limb out of joint had suddenly snapped back. It perceives that this is indeed how things really do work in the great world for which our nature is made. Now, there are two things that are really amazing about this statement from Tolkien. Before I hit those, please take a moment to like this video if you're this far in, and drop me a comment just even saying what's up, or let me know what you think of the video so far, and I'd love to continue the conversation at the end of the video. All right, so what was the Radcliffe Infirmary? Radcliffe Infirmary was actually a hospital in Oxford. It had been around since the mid-19th century, and Tolkien was riding his bike by it as he had this just strange epiphany. A hospital, what is it? It's a home for the sick. It's a home for the sick and sometimes the dying. Also, remember that this was in the midst of World War II. All right, November of 1944. They'd been at war for 5 years. England had been at war for 5 years at this point. Tolkien knew the horrors of war from his own experience, and by this point was well aware of the suffering and death that had resulted from the last 5 years of combat. And yet, something strikes him. He is filled with a certainty that death and suffering are not the end all be all, but that miracles and ultimately resurrection, the escape from death, are. Tolkien was given a miraculous little insight, not one that can be reasoned, but one that is suddenly known with certainty. A sudden glimpse of greater truth. The world wants to crush us with death, suffering, and despair, but that ultimately Christ has destroyed death by his resurrection, right? So Christ has ultimately destroyed death, evil, despair by his resurrection. Though we do suffer and die, that is not the end of the story for any of us. The end of the story is resurrection and eternal life. So how cool is that, right? Tolkien has this epiphany in the midst of suffering, both in physical proximity to suffering, but also just in the spiritual proximity to all the suffering that had been going on during World War II by this time. His own concerns about his son, right? His son's well-being, who he's writing this letter with, or writing this letter to. All of this, right? And he just has this flash of insight that, wait a minute, this isn't how things work. It's actually something different. It's actually the eucatastrophe. It's the resurrection, right? Because Tolkien ties eucatastrophe to the resurrection of Christ in On Fairy Stories, which had come before this. He actually tells Christopher in the midst of this letter, he's like, I really wish you'd read my essay that I'd sent you, but I don't think you've read it yet, right? Which he's talking about On Fairy Stories. So, of course, we see this theme alluded to all throughout The Lord of the Rings, and even little bits of it shining through in the darker legends of the Silmarillion. We glimpse it in Sam's epiphany in the darkest depths of Mordor when he sees the beam of starlight and realizes that the shadow is just a passing thing. And of course, the date of the ring's destruction, March 25th, foreshadows the incarnation and passion of Christ as well. And I think Tolkien would want all of us to keep this greater truth before us, especially in the darker moments of our lives. You know, when you're in these darker moments, I've started training myself to expect eucatastrophe, right? When you're going through something that's difficult, don't give in to the despair. Don't give in to thinking that that's the way things are, that this is the final statement on whatever you're going through, okay? The resurrection of Christ tells us to see things through a different lens, to see things through the lens of hope, to see things through the lens of eternity, and to see things through the lens of resurrection. Tolkien is drawing on his own faith here, his own very strong Catholic faith. And this is included in these letters for a reason. It really gives us a glimpse into how his mind worked. This certainly isn't the only moment that he talks about such things, but we see it in very great detail here. And it's just a beautiful moment to see Tolkien hit with this in a way that he describes. It's not like this like rational thought that he had. It wasn't like he was just thinking about such things, but it was almost like this beam of light came directly from heaven, like Sam right there in Cirith Ungol when he sees that starlight. It's like Tolkien is in something of a similar situation, maybe not as extreme as what Sam was going through at the moment, but he has this beam of light pierce his brain, right? Pierce into his mind and give him this illumination, give him this epiphany. Just a beautiful moment, and just another reason that I so love Tolkien. I so value his contributions and value his writings. And just his letters are just fantastic. If you don't own a copy of his letters, make sure you get a copy. You need to buy yourself a copy right now. Buy a copy of the letters for someone you know who might enjoy them, right? So they're fantastic. There's so much good stuff in them. I'll put a link in the show notes so that you can check those out if you don't already have a copy. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to leave a comment. Let's continue the discussion in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. If you haven't already, hit that notification bell too, right? So you'll know when I post a new video. So thanks for watching, everybody. Until next time, the road goes ever on. Namarie.